Well, hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the Optimize Your Landscape Irrigation webinar, another one hosted by the Roseville Utility Exploration Center. Hope you guys are all having a great day out there today. My name is Braden Mitchell, and I'm the Senior Interpretive Services Specialist at the Utility Exploration Center. For those of you who don't know us, we're a part of our utility departments here in Roseville, California. The great thing about Roseville, all of our utilities are municipally owned and operated. Those include solid waste, stormwater, wastewater, electric, and water. The Utility Exploration Center is a one-of-a-kind environmental learning center, which we focus on bringing all visitors information on protecting our natural resources. Our topics include energy efficiency, renewable technology, recycling, waste reduction, and of course, water conservation. We offer school programs, events, we have a free visitor center, we do workshops when we can meet in person, and of course we've started our webinar series just like this one. Unfortunately, right now our visitor center is still closed, but we're hoping to reopen soon, and when we do, I'm going to invite all of you to come out and explore Roseville's utilities with us, because together we can build a sustainable community. So before we really get into our webinar topic today, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping rules for us. First of all, this webinar is being recorded, and we will have it up probably about next week. We'll have it up on our webpage. That's roseville.ca.us/explore. You'll be able to go on that site and watch this webinar a few times if you need to, just to kind of remind yourself. We also have our other two webinars on there as well. So if you want to watch a little bit more about drip irrigation or some of the other ones, you're welcome to watch those also. That same site is also where we have some of the documents that we'll be sending out and supplying some of the stuff that our presenter is going to go over today. You should have gotten a link for all of that in your email this morning. But again, we'll send that link out at the end as well. Now for everybody out there, you do have an opportunity to ask questions during the webinar. So let me show you really quick, just in case you're new to the the Microsoft Teams platform. Up in the upper right corner of your screen, you should see this small little Q&A box, little question mark. If you click that, then this side panel will open up. And at the very bottom there, you'll see a button that says Ask a Question. Once you click that button, you can type in your question. You have an option of typing your name in there as well. If you go ahead and put your name, then we can respond directly back to you. But go ahead and you can ask any questions that you want along the way. We will have a question and answer period right at the end of the webinar. So if you want to hold those towards the end, that's fine. But we'll also kind of gather some of those questions and we can shoot those out to our presenter to answer for everybody at the end. Another thing to let you guys know is after our webinar is over, you're going to receive another email from us, and we're going to ask for a survey basically to find out what you thought of our webinar. This is still a fairly new thing for us, and we're super excited about being able to reach out to so many people, especially right now at this time where we can't have you in person. But we want to know, what we're doing well, what we should continue to improve on. So if you have a minute or two to fill that survey out when we send you the link later today, that would be a huge help to us. I think that's the bulk of our housekeeping things that I wanted to go over with you guys. So next, I'll talk a little bit, of course, about our presenter. Today, we have Marty Ricci, who is a City of Roseville employee. He's been with the City of Roseville for about 5 years, and he is a water conservation worker too. And when I was asking Marty about his time with the city, he's just loving it. He absolutely loves getting out there. He's one of the folks that goes out and does water-wise house calls, which you'll find out a little bit more about in a few minutes. And he just enjoys just about every minute of his job. On a personal note, when Marty isn't out there enjoying his job and helping residents with water issues, he's at home and he's taking care of all of his pets. And he's got a few of them. He's got a dog, he's got one cat, he's got one horse, and he's got 2 donkeys. I don't know how he went from 1 to 2 on the donkeys, but that's what he has at his house to kind of keep him busy. Plus, Marty also loves repairing computers just for the fun of it. But today we're going to rein him in and make sure that he focuses on his main passion, which of course is water efficiency. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and send that camera over to Marty. Are you ready, Marty?
I am. All right. Well, thank you, Braden. And to answer your question before we get into the topic, donkeys like to be in pairs. Not that this webinar has anything to do with donkeys, but that's why we have two of them. All right. So welcome everyone to Optimize Your Landscape Irrigation. I'm glad you all could join us today. Today we're going to go over a little bit of review from some of the other webinars, but a lot of the points that we want to drive home, and also get to different things you can do to get started on optimizing your landscape. Maybe you just bought a house, or maybe you inherited a home, something along those lines, and you have all this irrigation stuff out there, and you don't even know where to start. Well, let's go to the next slide. So where should you start? That's the question we're hoping to answer today. That's going to be a lot of what we're working on. So next slide. So where we start is right at the irrigation controller. And it's probably the same place you're going to want to start. Most of us all have one of these to turn on our sprinklers or our drip. And you're going to want to run a manual test of each station on a timer. And I know what a lot of you are thinking, well, how the heck do I even do that? Running a manual station on the timer, a lot of them are pretty straightforward. You'll see like a manual button on there. If you don't see that, refer to the instruction manual, or if you don't have your instruction manual anymore, because maybe it's a 20-year-old timer and that degraded a long time ago, you can find it on the web at the manufacturer's website. And if worse comes to worse, or even if it's not worse, give us a call and we're going to come out and help you with your timer and figure out all those different settings that it has. So, but assuming you do get a manual test going, you're going to want to mark down any issues you might see with each station and flag those major issues. Let's go to the next slide. So, areas you can improve. These are the different types of issues you might see while running your stations. We got some overspray there in the top left corner. In the middle there, we've got a very broken sprinkler. And in the top right, you see some runoff. Runoff's a big issue here in California because it's water that you're paying for, but you're not actually using. If you have water going onto the sidewalk, into the gutter, you just paid for that water, but it's not actually getting applied to your landscape in any way, shape, or form. A couple other issues you might see there down at the bottom are some clogged sprinkler heads. Most of these issues, they're really easy to fix. And that's why you want to flag them and be able to make those small adjustments to optimize. Next slide. So we start with, as we're going through, we fill out a site evaluation checklist. Your station numbers are up there in the corner there, and you can mark down all the different little issues you might see, like maybe the area is heavily watered and saturates easily, or there's excessive runoff that begins after just a couple minutes. These are all different things that you can check mark on each station. You're also going to want to mark which stations those are, and you can use that for a handy reference later on. Is it a turf station? Or maybe it's a shrub station. What is it fed by? Sprays, rotors, drip? Write those things down, and then that way, when you're going to make your repairs, you know what to buy, you know what issues you're trying to address. Next slide. But one of the really handy things you can make use of is a weather-based irrigation controller. And I start by saying that because we just talked about running a manual station of each timer. And what I do a lot of times, half of my day is running around somebody's house, going back and forth between their timer, turning that manual station on, and then running to where that station is. Well, guess what? With a weather-based irrigation controller, you can, for the most part, most of them, not all, but for the most part, control it from your phone. So you can be walking around a house, turning on each station manually and seeing where it turns on. No running around, even though, I need it a little bit, but no running around and wearing yourself out looking for these different stations. Next slide. So weather-based irrigation controllers, this is kind of what the phone interface looks like. Looks like we're looking at a Rachio interface. We're going to look at a couple more here in a second, but the reason I want to show it to you is just to show you all the different types of features it has. That middle screenshot there is showing it running manually. Looks like it's a station that's dedicated to chickens. And then we also have some weather data that's coming in on the left there, and all the different stations that the timer is capable on the right. The weather is picked up locally by different, news services and other, airports and such. They have their weather stations, SIMA stations, and they send it to the internet. It's the same way we get our internet on our, or get our weather through the internet on our phones. But these timers are using that data to determine how much to water by themselves. No more figuring out how many minutes you need to run it for. Next slide. So like I was talking about, it's connected to your home network. Your Wi-Fi router would be somewhere inside. Some people, if you're retrofitting a system, your timer might be a little bit far from where you put your Wi-Fi router. If you look in the middle there, you really squint, you'll see a Wi-Fi range extender. That does exist, and you can put that in there so that your timer can reach your home Wi-Fi router. For the most part, modern Wi-Fi routers are going to reach wherever you are in your home, unless it's a particularly large home. And it basically, it just takes over and uses that weather data. There's also a little showing a little rain sensor in there. A lot of these smart timers can also have a wired rain sensor in case your internet goes down or something. It'll read the weather data that's right there at your home, particularly rainfall or maybe solar exposure, that kind of thing. Next slide. So to review, smart irrigation controllers reduce outdoor water use by monitoring and using information about site conditions. It does this by evaluating the site's sun exposure, soil moisture, rain, wind, slope, the soil type, the plant type, all of that kind of data. They apply the right amount of water based on those factors, not too much, not too little, to maintain healthy growing conditions. And it uses weather or on-site weather data to schedule irrigation only when the landscape needs it. And the weather data is supplied by either the on-site weather sensor, that those little rain sensors and such, or by a subscription service, which usually these days are actually kind of free for most of these smart timers. Next slide. So how do you get that data in there, though? How does it know? Well, that's the one thing you really have to do, is put in the data for each station. So what a lot of people get wrong is these timers can be set up like a dumb timer, and with the start times, run times, and watering days, just like your old timer, your old one that you're removing has. So to put in the right one, we have to, figure out how this timer sets up those real smart details. And that's what Orbit calls it exactly, is smart details. So, for this one, you go to zones, and I picked out Orbit because a lot of us are upgrading to the Orbit Beehive, is this particular model. It's affordable, and a lot of people are picking this one out in particular. So that's why I picked this one. And so you go to zones, smart details, and in there you're going to put in that data for Roseville's specific soil type, which would be clay loam out here for almost all of you. And then the plant type would be cool season turf if it's a grass station. It might be fed by sprinklers or rotors. That's something that would be site specific. So knowing what you have out there would be a good thing to know. And then how much sun it gets and how much slope it has. A lot of us have yards on a slope, causes a lot of runoff. So putting in that slope will really help the beehive understand how much to cycle soak, which means running it for a little bit and then stopping and then running it later in the morning. That is going to be something we cover in a little bit, but let's go to the next slide. Same thing with Rain Machine, except Rain Machine calls it something different. Instead of smart details and smart watering, they call it advanced zone settings. So again, you find where your zones are, and you go to the weather and seasonal adjustments, and you pick out soil type, slope, vegetation type, all the same things you saw on the Orbit. They just call it something a little bit different, but it's still going to be clay loam. It's still going to have cool season turf on those grass stations. But These are just 2 smart timers. There's many, many more. There's the Ratio, and there's Hunter makes the HydroWise. I just picked these 2 out because they're some of the more common ones that we see. And Rain Machine actually offers a demo if you subscribe, or not subscribe, but just register for an account there, which is also free. So one thing my mom always tells me is when she's messing around on her computer, she's like, I'm so worried I'm going to break it. So if you're one of those technologically inept people like my mother, you can use their demo unit, mess around with these settings a little bit, and you're not going to mess anything up. You're just going to see the different settings you can set. I even saw on there on the most recent time I checked the Rain Machine's demo unit that somebody set the location to Alpha Centauri, which is not even in this solar system. So nothing is going to be messed up when you use this. All right, next slide. And another great feature is they're smart home capable. I know myself, I have a Google Assistant at home, and I basically have her control everything, my lights, my irrigation, everything. And so this is also capable of that. So you can say, okay, Google, when's the last time I watered? And it'll figure out when the last time it watered for you. It'll tell you, oh, the sprinklers last ran at 3 in the morning last night. And then that way you know if your sprinklers are actually running, in case you're looking out your window and seeing that it's getting dry or something. Next slide. So again, I'm going to go back to what we were just saying, how, maybe you feel like, well, that's all great and all, but I'm really technologically inept. There's no way that I'm going to be able to install a smart timer. Well, I've got news for you. You can install a smart timer, and the reason why is it's actually super easy to set up. I have people from all age ranges, all technological prowess, installing these different smart timers. So this is how easy it is. I picked this timer out because a lot of you have it if your home was built between 95 and 2005 maybe. They're very old. A lot of them are starting to break. I'm not saying yours is, but a lot of them do break. And you know how I know how old they are is sometimes they come with a sticker that says it's Y2K proof or something along those lines. If your timer says it's Y2K proof, it's probably time for a new timer. So what you're going to do is you're going to take off these panels here, and sometimes these panels have a few screws on them. It's not too hard to get off, and you're going to take off this here. Rainbird kindly kept all the wires in these little tabs. Oftentimes you have to screw out a little screw here to release the wires. So you're going to, well, before you pop it out, you're going to want to take a picture of it. At least that's what I do, or at least write down where all the colors are going. So it looks like in this case, yellow's going to 1, red to 2, and blue to 3. And keep that matched. So write that down. And then one other wire I'll mention is this white one. It's the common. It will always go back to common on any of the timers. So we're going to take these wires out. Now that we've taken our picture and written it down. And that's going to be somewhere on the wall here. And the timer is going to be held by a little mounting screw. You don't even have to remove that because your new timer will probably hook right onto that mounting screw. All right, so give me a second here. And we have our brand new smart timer right here. Not even opened yet. I know myself, I like to watch technology unboxing videos. Braden said I like to repair computers. Yeah, I'm a little bit of a computer geek. All right. So we're going to take our new timer out here in this nice plastic wrap. This is a favorite part of computer geeks is unwrapping these plastic pieces here. Smells like new technology. If I can get it open, wow. There we go. All right. I'm going to save the nice plastic wrap on the screen for the next computer geek. Basically, you're going to just pop the new panel open. Oh, it came off anyways. Oh, well. And you'll see there's tiny little screws on here, just like I was mentioning that some timers have. You're going to unscrew each of these just a little bit. Don't want to get the screw to pop out, but just to loosen it up. And basically, you're just going to be putting the wires back into the same spot that they went into before. All right. I'm not going to go through all of that, but it's good to know. Now, some concerns I might hear from people are that, well, what about these wires? What if I get shocked? Well, you could bring your spouse out and do the whole Jurassic Park thing, but they're not going to shock you. They're all really low voltage. So it's not going to hurt you. You can replace these, and you can wear gloves if you really want to, but you're not going to need to, and you can also disconnect the power if necessary. All right, and that's about it. So if you think you can't remove little screws to replace your smart timer, you're wrong. And basically, your phone is going to walk you through the rest. These smart timers have different ways of connecting. Essentially, you're just going to download the app and follow the instructions on there. It might have you connect to a certain Wi-Fi network, but that's not hard. And if you're really struggling with it, I'm sure someone in your family repairs computers or does something along those lines like I do and can give you a hand with it. But I have all kinds of people putting these in. Super easy to do. All right, so we're going to hop right back into the presentation now. So again, you might be saying, well, that's nice. Maybe a little out of my price range because they do run $80 to maybe $200 or so. So maybe not an investment that I want to put in there. So you're going to want to at least get your basic timer, your dumb timer, to run correctly. So we actually have a handy schedule available to Roseville residents, and this is just kind of a generalized schedule based on different experiences that we've had and doing a little bit of science with precipitation rates and stuff. So let's just take a look at the fall season, because that's what we're about to go into here. And we're just going to look at that turf fixed spray zone right there. We're going to give you how long you need to run it in the minutes per week. That doesn't mean I want you to throw 36 minutes right onto on a timer all at once. You're actually going to be breaking that up. You're going to break it down into 3 days out of the week. And yes, that is enough. You do want a little bit of a drying out period. And you're going to only want to run it maybe 4 times a day. Not every timer is capable of that. So, use your best judgment and best ability to change your timer. So 4 times a day is what we're really hoping you can get, and 3 minutes per cycle. So, runoff's going to start 3 to 5 minutes after you turn your sprinklers on, typically with these clay soils. So running it for only 3 minutes, you still get that kind of 9 to 12 minutes of water that your lawn really needs, but it's broken up in a way the soil has a chance to absorb it. All right, next slide. So, and then another thing you can install are home flow sensors. These are actually really great. I just had a customer a couple weeks ago who had one of these. We didn't even know he had a leak. His water usage really wasn't high, but that's because it wasn't registering on the water meter. And I'll just mention really quick, as water meters get older, they don't read as well, and they'll read a little bit slower because they're old, right? They don't like to turn as much in their little nutating disc that they have. So he actually detected this leak with his home flow sensor. He kept getting warnings that there was a leak somewhere. In the middle of the night, it wouldn't, don't worry, it doesn't blare at you in the middle of the night, but it would detect something in the middle of the night and let him know that there was this small leak somewhere, and he was really struggling to track it down. We were actually able to come out and help him track it down. And that's, one of the great advantages of this system is that you can use it to see if you have any kind of small leak. And also if it's like something big, like maybe your toilet exploded for whatever reason while you're in Jamaica or something, and you have no way of turning that water off, this is going to shut down that water for you. So great idea to upgrade to this. It'll really help if you were ever have an emergency. Next slide. Another great upgrade you can have for your landscape irrigation is pressure regulated heads. A lot of us, depending on the age of our home, don't have a pressure regulator going to the irrigation. And the city's going to be putting out roughly 80, maybe 90 PSI of water pressure, which is going to be too high for sprinklers. So you can install pressure regulated heads that brings that pressure down to something that is better for your sprinkler heads. It's going to reduce that misting that comes out of there and really reduce the excess water that you're putting out. Next slide. You can also improve your spray head performance by installing rotating stream nozzles or like Toro Precision nozzles. These look like the little fingers going across the lawn. That's what I always tell my customers when I'm trying to find a way to reference it to them, is that there's little fingers growing across the lawn. Oh yeah, I know what that is. These use about a quarter of the water that regular sprinklers use. That said, you do have to run it a little bit longer, but in the end, you're still going to be using less water than the regular sprinklers do. Next slide. So these rotary nozzles, they're wind resistant and they're multi-stream, those fingers again. They're adjustable for precise settings. So a lot of them, you can actually adjust to sort of any angle that you want. Typically when you buy just your standard sprinkler, it's gonna come in 180 degrees or 90 degrees, something along those lines. But these rotary nozzles, you can adjust to fit that really weird angle on your lawn. You know, maybe you've got like a 97-degree angle for some weird reason, and you've really been struggling with it, running off and constantly overspraying. These nozzles are the right tool for you because that's going to be able to fit that strange angle. So then they have low precipitation rates, like I mentioned. That reduces runoff also. Now, the one thing you're going to want to keep in mind, though, is that you have to match those precipitation rates. What do I mean by that? Don't start mixing sprinkler heads. Like I was mentioning before, the old sprinklers, they use maybe 2 to 4 times as much water as these new ones do. So if you were to just run to Home Depot and they tell you, hey, here's this nice new sprinkler, it says it's water savings, why don't you try this one? And you put it in there with your old style fixed spray heads, those you're going to start noticing dry spots and wet spots because you'll never be able to schedule it properly if they're all on the same station. If you're going to invest in these, you have to convert all of them to the same type of sprinkler head so that you match those precipitation rates. Next slide. So you can just replace the nozzles on the sprinklers. You just screw it off of there, hold on to the little piece sticking up, you pull that off and you screw the new one on. And then once you turn it on with that manual setting that you now have on your phone from the smart timer, you can make those small adjustments to it and get it to fit where it needs to go. Next slide. All right, and so here you see somebody taking their standard fixed spray heads and putting it into the rotary nozzle in there. Now, the one thing I still want to talk about with these is make sure you're buying the right one. So while they are fully adjustable with the angles and their range to an extent, you do have to make sure you're still buying the right range. Most of us are probably going to be buying, I'm just going to talk about Hunter here for a second because that's the chart that we have on the screen. Hunter makes the MP rotator. So if you're going to be buying something for just your standard home size lawn, you're probably going to be sticking to the MP 1000s or 2000s. The 1000s go from 8 feet to 15 feet. Those are adjusted with the little screw that's on the top of the sprinkler there, and turning it clockwise will turn it down all the way to 8 feet for the 1000, turning it counterclockwise will get it up to the 15 feet. So one thing I always really suggest with these for my customers is, hey, make a map of your lawn, measure out the distances just with a tape measure. It doesn't have to be super precise, but just a little bit. You could take that to an irrigation supply store, and we have a couple in Roseville, and they'll be able to match where those sprinkler heads are and need to go. It's a great way to figure out what you need to do and what you need to buy. And then the one other thing I'm going to mention on this slide is the MP corners and the MP strips. Many of us have those tiny little mow strips that are impossible to water. Second you turn your sprinklers on, they're spraying your car where you parked it on the road. Well, here's what you do. They've never really made a sprinkler head that's meant to fit there until now, and those are these corners and strips, and they can fit those tiny little mow strips by turning them down. I think they go all the way down to 5 or 6 feet or something like that. That's a really good upgrade to do. Keeps us off your back. You don't want us trying to give you tags for watering an insanely small piece of grass. So upgrade when you can. Next slide. All right, this one I see all the time. You drive around anywhere in Roseville, all of your homes are pretty much going to be on a slope. Even if you're out in West Park where it was nice and flat, they still put a small grade there for some reason, and your sprinklers are also going to be on that slope. So what happens is you'll notice that after you turn your sprinklers off, it's still draining. Do you have a leak? No, you just have low head drainage. That's water that's trapped in the line and coming out of that lowest sprinkler. So you can address that with check valves. Check valves keep that water in there, prevent it from spilling out, causing the algae and the runoff that's oozing out of your lawn all the time. You might have to experiment with it a little bit. If you put it, usually you'll just put it into the lowest sprinkler, but the next sprinkler up might start doing that. So sometimes you'll have to put in a couple check valves. Sort of depends on your landscape design. Experiment a little bit with it, see what gets that low head drainage to stop. Next slide. And then now we're going to go into drip. We talked a lot about drip in our last webinar, and you can find that webinar online in the same place that you're finding this, or going to find this webinar when it's complete. So if you want a little more detail on drip, definitely check out that webinar. But for now, we're going to summarize it a little bit because it's such a point that we want to drive home that this is a way more efficient style of watering. So drip, slow and precise application of water. It can be directly to root zones of turf, shrubs, trees, or gardens. It can be applied surface or subsurface. This includes the small little droplet drippers off the little button-sized things that you see, maybe a little small stream or miniature sprays. Next slide. So these are the 4 different types that you might see out there. The ones on the left column we're a little bit more partial to. I'll get to that in a second, but these are the point source and the inline drip. The point source, sometimes you could just get it right into the trunk line of the drip there, or you can have little spaghetti tubing coming off and have those little emitters going to each individual plant. Going to talk about that in a little bit also. And then inline drip it's like a soaker hose essentially, where it's almost got little holes in it, except they're more than just little holes. They have little emitters built into them. That's a great way to get an even amount of watering, and usually put it in like a grid-like system. So why don't we like the right-hand column? And I know what you're thinking, oh, I love those micro sprays. They're so easy to put everywhere. Yes, they are easy to put everywhere, but they use more water than you think they do. Actually, I have found that these micro sprays, they don't even publish the precipitation rates sometimes, because sometimes they're using just as much water as a regular sprinkler. Micro bubblers also, might work for like a young tree, but when your tree starts to get older, something like inline drip is going to work a lot better, like in a big ring a few feet away from the trunk of the tree. So we don't tend to like these styles of irrigation as much. There are uses for them, but we want to discourage them because almost all their applicable uses can be handled by the ones in the left-hand column. Next slide. So let's go into the point source one first. So irrigation water is moved through a main supply tubing to plant locations and emission devices through smaller distribution tubing. Typically, you're going to see that in maybe a 1/8 inch, though that's kind of the older style, or a 1/4 inch. And I said 1/8 inch. It's 1/8 of an inch. I'm sorry, and that's the old style. And then maybe a 1/4 inch, and that's sort of the new stuff that you're going to see. And that's manufactured out of polyethylene or vinyl material. Typically, you're just going to punch it right into that main supply tubing. There'll be a little bit of an adapter, and you attach that smaller spaghetti tubing into that distribution line. That's really easy to do. They make little easy to click punching tools to do so. And then you can run that spaghetti tubing to different locations through a series of T's, couplings, elbows, depends on what you need to do. So why is that so awesome is because it's so flexible. It's small diameter and again, flexible, and it can be run to different locations. So through plants, hardscapes, obstacles, you can kind of get it through a maze of stuff. So if you're redoing your drip and you don't want to tear out a bunch of plants or rocks and stuff, this might be a really good thing to use to get to those hard to reach areas. Next slide. One question I get a lot though with these is, well, how many emitters do I send to each plant? And I hear that question, I think almost every day. Really, it depends on the plant. And we have a guide that we're going to talk about here in a second. But here's a nice rule of thumb for you. You kind of increase it depending on what kind of plants you planted. Vegetables, maybe you only need 1 emitter per plant, and half a gallon to 1 gallon per hour, maybe every foot or so. When you start working your way up to big trees, some that are over 20 feet, you might need 6 emitters that are 2 gallons per hour and 4 feet away at the drip line. Maybe, we're going to have these slides up available for you, but if you want to write this down or take a screenshot, that's fine by me, but also you can always access this later. All right, next slide. So emitter placement. Placing your drip emitters too close together or too far apart is a bad move. I see a lot, especially on commercial properties. I think I was just at a Safeway the other day, not in Roseville, thankfully, where a tree had just pulled up this drip line and had like grown into it. It was like almost rotting out the trunk of the tree with how it was running because it was just so constricted. You never want to do something like that. You want to place them evenly to ensure that your plants get the amount of water without having areas oversaturated, and you want it maybe like at least 6 inches away from the base of the plant. Sometimes, especially if you have young trees that are going to get larger and larger, you're going to have to make adjustments, and that's just something you have to be aware of. Yes, drip and shrubs, they're low maintenance, but occasionally, you got to do a little maintenance out there, and you're going to have to go out there, move that drip so that it's still a safe distance away from whatever plant you have planted. Next slide. Now we're going to talk about inline drip. Inline drip is it is always installed as a grid. On that left-hand picture there, you can see that what it would look like underneath an already grown area in those dotted lines, and on the right, a nice close-up of what it does look like. And that's to apply even amount of watering to that area. Next slide. So this is used for plants that have similar water requirements. You don't want to go putting a high water use plant in with a bunch of low water use plants, because that high water use plant will probably never get enough water. And if you change your schedule to account for that high water use plant, well, now your low water use plants are getting too much water and may even drown on you. So you're going to place it on a surface or subsurface. Subsurface is used for turf. We're not going to really talk about that today, but they do make inline drip that goes underneath grass. And that's a really cool way to apply water to turf zones that aren't using sprinklers or traditional sprinklers. And they even the water distribution through capillary action, and you design dictated by soil type and flow rate of the emitter. Next slide. So an inline drip built-in emitter is talking about how it's like a soaker hose with little holes. And like I mentioned, it's not just a little hole. There's actually an emitter in there. So when you're going in and cutting this pipe, which is easy to do, just make sure you're not cutting where the emitter is, because you could damage that. Tiny little emitters that are going to control the flow coming out of that line there. Next slide. Here's just a couple of sample layouts that you can look at. Just because it's in a grid doesn't mean it has to be a perfectly rectangular shape, although they're a little bit rectangular in these images, but you can fit them to however you need to apply the water where you need it to go. Next slide. So flow rates of emitters must match the plant water requirement. We use a guide called WUCLS. That stands for Water Use Classification of Landscape Species. If you ever want to sound really smart, just memorize what WUCLS stands for and just bring it out at your next cocktail party. So higher water use plants need about 2 to 4 gallons per hour. Medium water use plants need about 1 gallon per hour. And low water use plants are a potted plant. And why potted? Because they're potted, they don't have a whole lot of soil depth in them. They'll fill up really quick. Only maybe a ½ gallon per hour emitter. Many emitters are color coded for gallon per hour depending on the manufacturer. Let's take a look at that on the next slide. So this manufacturer, I don't know which, I can't tell just by the image, but has used Black as 1 gallon per hour, green as 2 gallon per hour, and 4 is red gallon per hour. And you notice that I'm kind of emphasizing this manufacturer. Well, different manufacturers are going to use different colors, and that's just because they do what they want. So Hunter might have it like you see on the image here, whereas Rainbird might be split up with red being the 1 gallon per hour. It's hard to say. That's why you really want to take a look at one of their catalogs or something to figure out, okay, what are the precipitation rates of these different emitters? And while this image is great, you never want to have your drip line looking like that with a 1 gallon per hour next to a 2 gallon per hour next to a 4 gallon per hour. Please never do that. Next slide. All right, drip system summary. So we talked about the 2 different types, point source, inline, both great, just kind of depends on what you want to do and what your landscape requires. And then matching the emitter size to the plant water requirement. I'm not going to say it again, we've gone over it a couple times. And then WUCLs for the plant water use requirement. Again, that guide has pretty much every plant that's known in existence, and it'll tell you what their water requirement is. So if you have something that you're having trouble identifying out there, you could probably use WUCLs to figure out, am I even watering this correct? So again, that's water use classification of landscape species. Next slide. So retrofitting a drip system, one thing that you can definitely do is take an old sprinkler system that may have been watering your shrubs in the back or different areas like that. You can actually retrofit these into a drip with almost no trouble. You can take existing pop-up spray type, convert them to a drip, or maybe you're going to add a section to an existing drip, use a hose spigot for smaller areas. So one thing that you can do is you can tie a hose spigot on the side of your house to maybe like a veggie garden or something along those lines. And pro tip right here, they do make those smart timers for the little hose bib. I actually used one for a couple of years for one of my veggie gardens. Worked great. It read the weather, determined how much it needed to water, and I got the greatest tomatoes that year. So you can upsize those emitter sizes and additional pipe if necessary for larger trees or more shrubs, that kind of thing. Next slide. So these retrofit kits, they just tie in right to the sprinkler like I was talking about. Normally, if you're going through like our Cash for Grass program, for instance, you can, you're going to have a pressure regulator filter. Typically like to see it at the valve. But if you're really uncomfortable doing that pipe cutting and stuff, a retrofit kit is a really good option also because it has that pressure regulator and filter built into it. You're going to be screwing out the body of the sprinkler and just screwing the retrofit kit in, and it'll tie to those different types of drip that we talked about. So this is a really great system for upgrading and making it easy for yourself. Next slide. So this looks like this is going to be the Rainbird one. And like I said, you're just unscrewing that top of it and screwing the new one in. And what are you going to do with the rest of your sprinklers? You're going to use caps to cap off the other sprinklers. So you unscrew the tops and screw the caps on. Really easy to do. And just make sure they're nice and tight so they're not leaking out. If you need to have different zones, maybe you're on one station and different parts of it are kind of hard to reach, of course you can put 2 retrofit kits in. Just make sure they're all pressure regulated and they have the filter. Next slide. So this is another look at some other retrofit kits. That's an octobubbler on the left. On the right, we've got a spray to drip kit that's going right to those little spaghetti tubings. Maybe you just have a small section that was fed by one sprinkler. I've definitely seen it before. It happens, and you just want to convert it into a drip line. You can put in one of these tiny little ones with all the spaghetti tubing already built into it. No more punching of those big drip hoses that we were taking a look at. Next slide. So inline drip system retrofit kit. So they also go to those inline drip with the ones with the emitters built in there. All kinds of different things you can make use of to make your life easier in converting from spray to drip. Next slide. So turf removal. So we just talked about how you can easily convert your spray to drip. Now we're going to talk about, well, you want to remove your grass because that's where your sprinklers are, at least for the most of you, but man, that's a lot of work. The sod cutting can be just so expensive. There's actually a more affordable way to do this, and we call that process sheet mulching. Next slide. So sheet mulching, we could talk a long time about sheet mulching, but sheet mulching, essentially what it is you're going to be laying down cardboard right on top of your lawn. You don't even need to kill it first. You're just going to put that cardboard right on there. You might want to put some lawn staples in there to make sure it's not blowing up in the wind or anything like that and get it into a nice shape. Right on top of that cardboard, you're going to be putting compost. And then on top of the compost, you're going to put mulch. And then you're done. That's really the short and sweet of it. It's so easy to do. People do this on weekends, remove their entire front yard and put in a low water use landscape that's very drought tolerant, and just, without spending nearly as much money as it costs to have people come with with tilling or a sod cutter and pay all that labor fees. You can do this yourself. This is a great DIY project, especially when you're using those drip retrofit kits. So why am I talking about this so much? Well, because you can do this as your cash for grass. You want to make use of that rebate, get that $1,000 from us, dollar per square foot, up to $1,000, and you can apply for that rebate, do this work yourself without spending all of that money and more on a crew or a landscaper to do this work for you. So next slide. And so this is what the finished project would look like. This one, someone spent a lot of time on this one. It looked really, really good. And the thing I'm going to mention about sheet mulching is, yes, you do get kind of a hill shape out of it. You're basically putting a lasagna of turf, cardboard, compost, and mulch into your yard there. So it'll raise up a little bit, but with some clever landscaping designs, you can really make it look very, very nice. Next slide. So internet resources, we talked a lot about different products, different places to go, different things to use today. This is a great source of different internet things on here. Has all the different products, has the WUCL's guide in there. So please make use of this to figure out what you're going to do to optimize your landscape irrigation. Next slide. And then if you don't want to use any of those resources, if you really can't figure out how to, or even if you can, but you want some more questions answered, if you need someone to run those manual stations on your timer, give us a call. We do offer a free WaterWise house call. Myself or another tech, maybe a couple other techs, can come out, give you a hand with that, figure out what's going on with your irrigation and what's the best move to make for your home. So we're more than happy to help you with that. Next slide. And I'll take any questions now.
Yeah, Marty, this is Joe. I had a question regarding overspray. How do I check overspray?
So overspray is going to be dependent on a few different factors. Most of your sprinklers, though, have a little screw that's on them, and that can adjust how far it's shooting. If it's not really adjusting very well, parts of it may have worn out. If you have older sprinklers, the screw may not be adjusting properly anymore, so you might want to replace your sprinklers. You also want to make sure you're getting the right angle in there, too. A lot of people, they'll accidentally put like 180 degrees into a 90-degree spot. I know that seems kind of obvious or whatever, but it does happen. We do see it. So see if you can get a sprinkler that's proper for that spot and fits the angle that you have. And then also turn it down so it's not shooting over the lawn. And again, it's the same way I described the Hunter MP rotor. It's a clockwise turn to get it to bring the angle or the spray down. Next slide, or sorry, next question.
What causes the sprinkler valve to stay open?
A lot of different things. High pressure can do that, and actually low pressure can do that too. Sometimes if you, I've noticed if you schedule a timer wrong and you have two zones coming on at the exact same time, they'll suck the pressure from each other, and then neither of them can get the pressure back to close. So that can definitely happen. And then also, again, we're talking about worn out parts. If your sprinkler valves are right in the sun, maybe a little bit baked, those little diaphragms are starting to wear out and they just don't want to close anymore. It's basically just held back with a spring and a rubber diaphragm. I know I played with rings all the time when I was a kid, and they wear out. So that's definitely different reasons for that.
Next question. If I don't want my timer, can I turn valve on somehow?
Yes, there are ways to turn on valves manually. Some of them, let's see, I do have one valve here. It doesn't look like it'll unscrew though. Some of them can just be controlled by the solenoid. You'll see two arrows going. One says on, one says off. Give it, I think it's about a quarter turn, and it'll turn on manually. There's also some valves that have what's called a little bleeder screw that's going to be off to a corner a little bit on it. Giving that a little turn will turn them on. Also, just keep in mind it'll spit a little bit of water out, so you might get a little wet. Don't worry, your valve isn't leaking or anything. Anytime I've turned on a valve manually for a customer at the bleeder screw, they're like, oh, that valve is broken. It's not, it's just the bleeder screw leaks a little.
And last question I have is, how do I raise a sprinkler head?
To raise a sprinkler head, you could get maybe taller risers. They also make sprinkler bodies that are taller. So really, you just got to figure out how much larger you want to go, screw out that body, and get a new one that's maybe a little bit taller to go in there.
Great. Thank you, Marty. That's all I have.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming. I'll pass it back off to Braden. You're muted, Braden.
Are you doing your
I did it again, didn't I? Sorry, guys. There's this little button down there in my screen that tells me to unmute, and apparently I clicked that a little too fast this time. I just wanted to say, hey, thanks you so much, Marty, for doing this presentation and agreeing to provide all this great information out to our audience today. And of course, thanks to you guys for coming out and signing up for this webinar. I really hope you got a lot of your questions answered. But I do want to recognize that, you know, maybe as you start to get into your different projects, especially if you live here in Roseville, more questions might come up. So Marty mentioned that Waterwise house call. You guys can go ahead and give our water agency a call and ask all those questions, especially as they come up. Or you can also watch this webinar again or others on our website. Again, that's roseville.ca.us/explore. As I mentioned in the very beginning, we will be sending out a survey for everybody, so please make sure to fill that out. Make sure that you tell me to unmute myself so that when I do my conclusion at the end, you actually get to hear it. I want to see those in that survey, but it only takes a minute or two, so go ahead and fill those out for us. It really helps us know what we're doing well, what to improve on, and just stay tuned. We will have more webinars coming. We don't have anything scheduled immediately, but watch our website, again, rosevilleca.us/explore, and we'll have more information on future webinars for you. Thanks again, guys. Have a great rest of your Friday, and have a great weekend.